This is edition 32 of Father Cory's Book Club. Today I'm reviewing What They Saw in America by James L. Nolan Jr., published in 2016. In keeping with my usual habit of striving for a diverse mix of titles and genre when I write a themed series of book reviews, I review here one that has become one of my favorite books. Odd because I never thought I would say this about a text on sociology written by a professor of sociology. Sociology is one of those disciplines about which the philosophers and theologians are very often at least cautiously fascinated by, or at worst outright suspicious of. Peter Kraft points out there are relatively few atheists among neurologists and brain surgeons and among astrophysicists, but many among psychologists, sociologists, and historians. The reason seems obvious. The first study divine design, the second study human undesign. And yet Dr. James Nolan is not himself an atheist, nor does he write history or sociology in a way that is inconsonant with a Catholic way of looking at the world, which is to say I found nothing objectionable about his presentation in this book. The book, What They Saw in America, details four important figures who all made visits to the United States at various points during the modern period. I first learned about it by way of the Mars Hill audio journal, which is excellent, you should check it out, wherein Dr. Nolan was giving an interview about his then recently released book, which was based on a class he teaches every year at Wheaton College, where he is chair of sociology. The four figures he profiles are Alexis de Tocqueville, along with his traveling companion Gustave de Beaumont, the author of Democracy in America, de Tocqueville, not Beaumont, Max Weber, the German father of sociology, our friend G.K. Chesterton, and fascinatingly enough, in his inclusion among these figures, Syed Qutb, the godfather of modern Islamic fundamentalism. The book piqued my interest precisely because of Qutb's being profiled within it. At the time I heard Nolan's interview, I was amidst some private study on the recent history of the Middle East. I found it incredibly interesting to hear that all four of these figures could be mentioned alongside one another with very strong comparisons drawn, though they represented very different worldviews. A French lapsed Catholic, though de Tocqueville apparently became more faithful later in life, a German agnostic sociologist, an English Christian, Protestant during his first visit to the U.S., Catholic during his second, and a name who is rarely mentioned in the West without being connected to Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. As it turns out, all of them recorded similar observations about American life, and all of them spoke favorably of the same sorts of things, and all of them criticized the same sorts of things. We must adjust our comparisons, of course, for the sake of historical development. Chesterton and Qutb both criticized the American fascination with football, which wouldn't have been a widespread phenomenon by the time Weber visited, and wouldn't have existed at all for Tocqueville. For those two who did criticize it, they both saw it as some kind of a symptom of a problem with American society, namely that such a violent sport would be beloved by so many people, bearing in mind that Chesterton is writing in the early part of the 20th century, and Qutb in the middle, and in both periods football was considerably more dangerous than it is now. All four men, as I've said, praised similar things about American life, and chief among what they favored about America was their experience of rural agrarian society. Weber was actually in the U.S. so he could speak at the 1904 World's Fair, giving a lecture on rural sociology. Closer to home for us here, he actually traveled through Mount Airy, North Carolina, near the Virginia border, so he and his wife could visit her relatives there, and a historic marker in the town commemorates his visit. But again, all four found that rural communities represented the best of what America had to offer, even Syed Qutb, who was never short on radical language about American life. And I will say Dr. Nolan does an excellent job of filtering out a lot of Qutb's radicalism and giving us sort of the essence of his thought. He spoke glowingly, though, of the farming communities he visited. Qutb, not Nolan. I'm having a hard time with antecedents and pronouns today. I could say a lot more about all of the figures in this book, since, as I said, it's a very fascinating one. It's one of my favorite books. After I read it, I was barely a quarter of the way through it when I decided it was one of my favorite books. But our main concern in this series of reviews is Chesterton. Dr. Nolan is thorough in chronicling each of the figures he's written about here, with the book structured as an introduction to all the figures, 2 chapters on each one of them, and then a lengthy conclusion where he draws comparisons between all of their travels and observations. Chesterton's 2 chapters concern his 2 visits to the United States, one occurring before his conversion to Catholicism and the other after. As mentioned, he praised American rural life, as did the other figures profiled in the book. One of the things which drew the sharpest criticism from Chesterton, even in his pre-conversion visit, was prohibition, which he saw as a sort of tax on the poor, targeted primarily at working-class Irish Catholics. One of the more memorable episodes that Nolan recounts involves a visit of Chesterton, along with novelist Sinclair Lewis and playwright John Drinkwater, to a bookstore in St. Louis owned by Mr. Walter Hill. The eminent authors were there meeting fans and signing books. Nolan recounts, and I quote, "Walter Hill invited the three literary men to stay for lunch and to partake of something rare in his safe besides books. An observer, Earl E. Fisk, suggested that the three men should write a play together. As they discussed the idea, in a haze of alcohol, Lewis proposed that the play be called Mary, the Queen of Scotch, Mary with 2 R's, and it was agreed that Chesterton would write the first act. Not surprisingly, given his love of detective novels and his success with the Father Brown mysteries, Chesterton decided that the play should be a murder mystery. There's nothing like a nice murder, Chesterton said, to get human interest into the play. Drinkwater would write the next act to deepen the mystery, and Lewis would conclude with the solution and happy ending. The plot would involve a murder victim who was a world-renowned American prohibitionist found dead in his Paris hotel room with the murder weapon, a broken quart bottle, lying next to his body. There's no evidence that the proposed play ever came to fruition." That paragraph alone, I think, serves as a good advertisement for Nolan's work, but in general, I would say that his book is good for placing Chesterton within his own proper context in the history of ideas. I recommend the book if for no other reason than the fascinating comparisons that may be drawn between Chesterton and the others, particularly Syed Qutb. Bear in mind that the similarities do not mean that Chesterton was a fanatic or a radical like Qutb, but more that Qutb takes good ideas, even legitimate criticisms of Western society, and runs way too far afield with them. It's an example of how virtue is about finding the mean between two extremes, and that even the extremes that lie in the realm of vice still have their roots in some truth, a truth that they may long since have passed by. And that's all for edition 32 of the book club, this third book club via video. I'm going to stop doing the disjointed counting of these. I thank you for your views and your likes and for your feedback. I did get some good feedback on the St. Francis of Assisi video. Had someone send me a review of that book, actually written by the future Pope Paul VI, the time that I believe he was still just a bishop. And it's in Italian, and I'm gonna, I think I told the commenter I was gonna take a run at reading it, since I, for one, have some modest facility with Italian, given that my knowledge of Spanish and Latin, and also I have all kinds of time, so I may as well. But I thank you for all your feedback. Please continue to like, to share, to subscribe, all that other good YouTube stuff. Thank you very much. God bless.